Have you ever felt like you were being watched by something that wasn't quite human? That feeling when your eyes meet the vacant stare of a doll, and for a split second you could swear those glass eyes blinked. What would you do if you discovered that the antique doll collection passed down in your family wasn't just a collection, but a prison for something ancient and malevolent? Before you continue watching this video, tell me in the comments where you're from. And if this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. This channel needs your help to continue bringing these hidden, forgotten stories to light. The small town of Blackwood, Arkansas, nestled in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains, was once known for its thriving logging industry and close-knit community. In 1908, it became infamous for something else entirely, a discovery so disturbing that local authorities attempted to suppress all records of the incident. Had it not been for the meticulous journal of Deputy Sheriff Thomas Harding, discovered in a county archive storage facility in 2023, the truth about the Whitmore sisters might have remained buried forever. Elizabeth and Margaret Whitmore were born in 1876 and 1878, respectively, to Henry Whitmore, a successful timber merchant, and his wife, Abigail. The family lived in a grand Victorian home on the outskirts of Blackwood, set back from the main road and partially hidden by a dense copse of oak trees. Henry Whitmore's business brought considerable wealth to the family, allowing them to live in a style that was uncommon for the region at the time. According to town records, the Whitmore sisters were seldom seen in public after they turned 16. Their mother, Abigail, told neighbors and acquaintances that both girls suffered from a rare condition that made exposure to sunlight painful, explaining their absence from church services and social gatherings. Most townspeople accepted this explanation without question, as the Whitmores were respected members of the community and generous donors to local causes. Henry Whitmore died in 1901, leaving his considerable fortune to his wife and daughters. Following his death, the family became even more reclusive. Groceries and other necessities were delivered to the home by the local general store, but the delivery boy was never permitted past the front porch. The windows of the house were always covered with heavy drapes, and on the rare occasions when either Margaret or Elizabeth was spotted in town, they wore veils that obscured their features. We all thought they were just peculiar, the way wealthy folks often are, recalled Eliza Jenkins, who worked as a seamstress in Blackwood at the time. Her statement was recorded in a 1960 interview with a local historian interested in the town's past. Mrs. Whitmore would place orders for fabric and patterns, always the finest quality, but she never came for fittings. She provided measurements for herself and her daughters, and I'd send the finished garments with my apprentice. He said the house always smelled like a mixture of rose water and something medicinal he couldn't place. Abigail Whitmore passed away in 1908 from what the death certificate listed as heart failure. Dr. William Preston, the town physician who signed the certificate, later admitted in a private letter to his brother that he had been called to the Whitmore home only after Abigail had been dead for at least 3 days. The sisters explained that they had been too distraught to notify anyone immediately. What happened next is documented in Deputy Sheriff Harding's journal, discovered more than a century later. The following are excerpts from his account. October 12, 1908, I received a troubling report from Stanley Cooper, the delivery boy from Harrison's General Store. He claimed that he had not seen either of the Whitmore sisters in over 2 weeks, despite making regular deliveries. The last time he'd been there, he noticed a peculiar smell coming from inside the house, which he described as sweet but wrong somehow. Ordinarily, I wouldn't investigate based solely on a boy's concern, but given the recent passing of Mrs. Whitmore and the family's unusual circumstances, I decided to pay a visit to the property tomorrow. October 13th, 1908. I arrived at the Whitmore estate shortly after 9 this morning. The grounds showed signs of neglect, overgrown grass, fallen branches littering the gravel driveway, and dead leaves piled against the porch steps. I knocked repeatedly, but received no answer. Walking around the perimeter of the house, I noticed that all windows remained covered by heavy drapes, but one second-floor window was partially open. The smell Stanley mentioned was indeed present, cloying and unnatural. After consulting with Judge Thornton, I obtained permission to enter the premises to check on the welfare of the sisters. Constable Reed accompanied me. Upon entering through the front door, which was unlocked, we were struck by the oppressive stillness of the place. The air inside was stagnant and thick with dust, and that sickly sweet odor much stronger now. The ground floor appeared untouched for weeks. A fine layer of dust covered every surface. In the parlor, we discovered something unusual. Dozens of porcelain dolls arranged in a semicircle on the floor, all facing the doorway as if waiting for someone to enter. Each doll was exquisitely crafted, wearing miniature versions of ladies' fashion from different historical periods. Constable Reed remarked that it was downright unsettling, and I couldn't help but agree. We proceeded upstairs, calling out for the Mrs. Whitmore. The second floor contained 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom, presumably once occupied by Henry and Abigail Whitmore, was immaculate but showed no signs of recent use. 2 smaller bedrooms appeared to belong to the sisters, with personal items and clothing suggesting recent occupation. It was the 4th bedroom at the end of the hall that contained the scene I shall never forget as long as I live. The journal entry continues with a detailed description of what Deputy Harding and Constable Reed discovered in that 4th bedroom, a scene so disturbing that the town council later voted to seal all official records related to the case. According to Harding's account, they found Elizabeth and Margaret Whitmore seated side by side on a love seat positioned in the center of the room. Both women were deceased, yet their bodies showed no signs of decomposition, despite having been dead for what Dr. Preston later estimated to be approximately 3 weeks. Their skin had a waxy, porcelain-like appearance, and their eyes were wide open, staring fixedly at the doorway. Surrounding them on all sides were dolls, not dozens, but hundreds. Every available surface in the room was covered with them. Shelves lining the walls from floor to ceiling, tables positioned throughout the space, even the floor itself, with narrow pathways left to navigate between them. Each doll was positioned to face the sisters. Most disturbing of all was the similarity between many of the dolls and the sisters themselves. Dozens of the dolls appeared to be crafted in the image of Elizabeth and Margaret at various ages, from childhood to their current appearance. The craftsmanship was remarkable, with lifelike glass eyes and human hair that Dr. Preston later confirmed matched samples taken from the sisters. "I have seen men shot and killed during my time as a lawman," Harding wrote. "I have discovered victims of terrible accidents in the lumber mills. But nothing has affected me like the sight of those women, still and silent as the dolls that surrounded them, their skin with the same unnatural sheen as the porcelain figures." Constable Reed, a veteran of the Spanish-American War who has witnessed true horrors, was so disturbed that he excused himself to be violently ill outside. The mystery deepened when Dr. Preston conducted his examination. His notes, included as an appendix to Harding's journal, describe his bewilderment at the sisters' condition. The bodies defy medical explanation. Despite clear indications that death occurred approximately 3 weeks ago, there is no evidence of rigor mortis, decomposition, or any of the expected post-mortem changes. The skin has a peculiar texture, firm and smooth, almost artificial in appearance. When pressed, it yields slightly before returning to its original state, much like the bisque porcelain used in fine dolls. Most inexplicable is the complete absence of blood in the vascular system. Small incisions made during examination produced no fluid. Instead, the vessels contain a white, waxy substance that I cannot identify with my available resources. The internal organs are similarly preserved, though desiccated, as if all moisture has been systematically removed. I can offer no natural explanation for this condition. Were I a superstitious man, I might suggest some form of mummification process, though I know of none that would produce these specific results. The investigation took an even more disturbing turn when authorities examined the extensive collection of dolls. Hidden inside a compartment in the base of each doll was a small scrap of fabric. Dr. Preston confirmed that these were swatches of human skin, treated and preserved through some unknown process. Most appeared old, dating back decades or even centuries based on their condition, suggesting that the collection had been accumulated over generations. A search of the house revealed a hidden room in the basement, accessible through a concealed door in the pantry. Inside was what appeared to be a workshop, with tools for doll making, numerous glass eyes of different colors, and human hair of various shades and textures arranged in labeled drawers. Leather-bound journals dating back to the early 1800s detailed a process described as vessel preparation and essence transfer, written in a cramped, meticulous hand. The most recent journal entry, dated just 3 weeks before the discovery of the bodies, read simply, "The circle is complete. We have surrendered ourselves to become the final vessels. May those who came before us find peace in our sacrifice." Reverend Jonathan Miller, who had served as the town's spiritual leader for over 20 years and had known the Whitmore family well, was called to the house. Upon seeing the scene, he reportedly fell to his knees in prayer before making a startling declaration. "This is the culmination of a sin that has festered in this community for generations," he was quoted as saying in Harding's journal. "The Whitmore lineage has always been tainted by their association with the old ways, the practices they brought with them from the old world. I feared something like this might come to pass when I noticed the patterns." When pressed by Deputy Harding, Reverend Miller explained that he had observed unusual markings carved into the frames of certain dolls that had been donated to church fundraisers by Abigail Whitmore over the years. The symbols resembled those used in folk magic traditions from Eastern Europe, specifically regions of what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from where the Whitmore family, originally Weissmore, had emigrated in the early 19th century. "Those dolls were never sold," Miller stated. "I destroyed them, believing them to be vessels for something unholy. Perhaps if I had spoken up sooner." The Reverend's comments led investigators to examine town records more closely. They discovered that in every generation of the Whitmore family, since their arrival in America, there had been at least one case of a family member dying under mysterious circumstances, always preceded by a period of seclusion and unusual behavior. More disturbing still was the pattern of disappearances in and around Blackwood over the decades, predominantly young women and children who had vanished without a trace. While never previously connected to the Whitmore family, the dates of these disappearances corresponded with periods when the family had been actively acquiring new dolls for their collection. "I recall now that my grandmother spoke of a Whitmore woman from 2 generations back," Eliza Jenkins stated in a follow-up interview after the bodies were discovered. "She said the woman would offer to make portrait dolls of children in the town, exact likenesses that captured their very essence. Some families accepted, believing it an honor to have such a fine lady take an interest in their children. My grandmother said that in every case where a portrait doll was made, the child would fall ill within months, wasting away despite doctors' best efforts." As news of the gruesome discovery spread, other long-buried stories began to surface. An elderly man named Frederick Thompson came forward with an account of his sister's encounter with Margaret Whitmore in 1896. "My sister Ruth was 16 at the time, and she had been hired to help with spring cleaning at the Whitmore house, one of the rare occasions when outsiders were permitted inside. She came home distraught, saying she had opened a door to what she thought was a linen closet, and instead found a small room filled with dolls seated in tiny chairs around a table, as if having a tea party. She said the moment she opened the door, she could have sworn they all turned to look at her before becoming still again. Ruth told me that Margaret Whitmore appeared beside her almost instantly, closed the door, and said in a calm voice, "They don't like to be disturbed while they're feeding." Ruth left immediately and refused to return, despite the generous pay. She developed a fever the next day and suffered from terrible nightmares for weeks afterward. In her delirium, she would cry out that they were trying to pull something out of her through her eyes. The investigation was abruptly halted 2 weeks after the discovery of the bodies. Orders came from the state capital to seal all records related to the case and to inter the remains of Elizabeth and Margaret Whitmore immediately, with no public funeral or announcement. The dolls were to be destroyed according to official documentation. However, Deputy Harding's journal reveals that the night before this was to be carried out, a fire broke out in the storage room of the sheriff's office where the collection was being held. By the time it was extinguished, the dolls had been reduced to ashes, all except for 12 that had apparently been removed before the fire started. These 12 dolls, each bearing a striking resemblance to Elizabeth and Margaret Whitmore, were never recovered. The Whitmore house stood empty for decades, with no relatives coming forward to claim the property. Local children dared each other to approach the house or peek through the windows, but none were brave enough to enter. In 1942, another fire, this one of suspicious origin, consumed the structure entirely. The land was eventually purchased by the town and converted into a public park, with no marker or indication of what had once stood there. For years, residents of Blackwood reported strange occurrences in and around the park: the sound of children's laughter when no children were present, the sensation of being watched from the tree line, small footprints appearing in fresh snow that started and stopped inexplicably. Eventually, these stories faded as the generation that remembered the Whitmore sisters passed away. The case might have remained buried in obscurity had it not been for a series of antique dolls that began appearing in collections and auctions across the country in the 1970s. Known as Whitmore Originals, these dolls commanded high prices among collectors due to their exceptional craftsmanship and lifelike features. Few knew the dark history behind them. In 1979, a collector in New Orleans purchased what was purported to be one of the original Whitmore dolls. According to her daughter's account, the woman became increasingly paranoid after bringing the doll into her home, claiming that its expression would change when she wasn't looking directly at it. 3 months after the purchase, the collector was found dead in her study, seated in a chair facing the doll, which was positioned on a shelf across the room. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the responding officer noted the woman's expression as one of absolute terror. Similar incidents have been reported sporadically over the years. In each case, the owner of a suspected Whitmore doll experienced a period of declining mental health, reporting sensations of being watched or drained of energy, before dying under circumstances that medical science could explain, but that left friends and family unsettled. The most recent confirmed case occurred in 2018, when a 37-year-old woman in Portland, Oregon, purchased a doll from an online auction that matched the description of Margaret Whitmore at age 20. Within weeks, she began posting on social media about vivid dreams in which the doll spoke to her, offering to take away her pain and make her perfect and eternal. Her final post read, "It's not just a doll. There's something inside it, something that wants to be inside me instead. I can feel it trying to hollow me out when I sleep, but part of me wants to let it in. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be preserved forever, to never age or suffer or die, to become a perfect vessel?" She was found 2 days later, seated at her vanity mirror. According to the police report, her body was unusually stiff, Her skin had a strange, waxy sheen, and her eyes were wide open, staring directly at the doll positioned on a shelf across the room. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest, but noted several anomalies, including an unidentified white, waxy substance in her vascular system. The doll disappeared from the evidence locker 3 days later. In the summer of 2023, during renovations at the Blackwood County Records Office, a maintenance worker discovered a false wall in the basement. Behind it was a small room containing a single wooden crate. Inside the crate were Deputy Harding's journal, Dr. Preston's medical notes, and a sealed lead box. Attached to the box was an envelope with instructions that it should never be opened, written in Harding's handwriting. County officials, unaware of the significance of the find, initially planned to include the items in a historical display. It was only when a researcher recognized the names mentioned in the journal that the true importance of the discovery became apparent. The lead box remains in the custody of the Arkansas State Historical Society. Despite numerous requests from researchers and paranormal investigators, it has not been opened out of respect for Deputy Harding's explicit warning. What remains inside is the last physical evidence of a darkness that should stay buried. Opening this container risks releasing something that has waited patiently for over a century for a new vessel. Some things are meant to stay hidden. Rumors persist that dolls matching the description of those from the Whitmore collection continue to surface in estate sales, antique shops, and online auctions. They are said to be unnaturally heavy for their size, with glass eyes that reflect light in unusual ways, and skin that feels surprisingly warm to the touch, as if they've just been held by someone else, even when they've been sitting untouched for days. Those who claim to have encountered these dolls describe an immediate and intense emotional connection, a sense that the doll is not merely watching them, but seeing something inside them that even they themselves cannot perceive. This connection is often accompanied by vivid dreams in which the doll speaks, offering comfort, understanding, and a seductive promise. Eternal preservation, freedom from the ravages of time and the pain of mortal existence. But according to Deputy Harding's final journal entry, dated just days before his unexpected death in 1926, what the dolls truly offer is something far more sinister. I have carried the burden of what I witnessed in that house for nearly 2 decades now. I have watched for signs that what the Whitmore sisters unleashed, or perhaps merely continued, has truly ended. I am no longer certain that it has. Last night, I dreamed of the sisters as they appeared when we found them, but in my dream, their eyes followed me as I moved about the room. Elizabeth's lips parted slightly and she whispered, "A vessel once opened remains a doorway forever." I awoke to find a small porcelain doll on my bedside table, a perfect miniature of my 7-year-old granddaughter, down to the small birthmark on her left cheek. My wife swears she knows nothing about it. My granddaughter claims a pretty lady gave it to her while she was playing in the yard, saying it would keep part of her young forever. I have destroyed the doll and sealed its remains in a lead box with the only other physical evidence I kept from that cursed house. If anyone reads this account after my passing, I implore you, be watchful of your children, be suspicious of perfect likenesses. And if you ever encounter a doll with eyes that seem to hold knowledge they shouldn't possess, eyes that see not just your face, but your essence, destroy it immediately and thoroughly. Some vessels are meant to remain empty. To this day, visitors to Blackwood occasionally report seeing 2 women in outdated dress walking among the trees in what is now Riverside Park, formerly the Whitmore property. They are always described as unnaturally still until they move, with skin that catches the light like polished porcelain and eyes that never blink. Those who encounter them report feeling suddenly drained and lethargic, as if something vital has been pulled from them. Children in the area tell their own version of the story, a warning passed from one generation to the next. They say that if you stand in front of a mirror in a dark room and whisper "Whitmore Sisters" 3 times, you'll see 2 pale faces behind your reflection, watching with hungry glass eyes. And if you turn around to look, they'll take something from you that you can never get back. But as terrifying as these stories may seem, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Whitmore case is not what is known, but what remains hidden. How many of their dolls still exist, circulating among unwitting collectors? What secrets are contained in the sealed lead box that authorities refuse to open? And most chillingly, if the essence of a person can somehow be transferred into a porcelain vessel, where do the original souls go? Some questions are perhaps better left unanswered. But if you ever find yourself drawn to a particularly lifelike antique doll, with glass eyes that seem to follow you around the room, remember the fate of the Whitmore sisters and the countless others whose essence may be trapped behind those unblinking eyes, waiting for a chance to escape. Remember that sometimes the price of immortality is your humanity. And in moments of weakness, when age and mortality weigh heavily upon you, when the doll seems to whisper promises of eternal preservation, turn to God and Jesus Christ, who offer true eternal life, not the hollow imitation promised by those porcelain prisons. They're watching, they're waiting, and they've been collecting new vessels for over a century. The discovery of Deputy Harding's journal in 2023 sparked renewed interest in the Whitmore case. Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, a forensic anthropologist specializing in historical cases, petitioned the Arkansas State Historical Society for permission to examine the sealed lead box mentioned in Harding's final entry. After months of bureaucratic resistance, she was finally granted limited access under strict conditions. The box could be scanned using non-invasive methods, but it would not be opened. The results of these scans were inconclusive. The lead lining prevented clear imaging of the contents, though irregularities in the density suggested the presence of multiple small objects with what Dr. Reynolds described as unusual internal structures. Whatever is inside that box, she noted in her report, it doesn't conform to expected patterns for organic or inorganic materials. The closest analogy I can offer is that it resembles a hybrid, something with properties of both bone and porcelain. Dr. Reynolds' interest in the case extended beyond the mysterious box. She began tracing the history of the Whitmore family back to their European origins, uncovering disturbing patterns that spanned centuries before their arrival in America. The family, originally named Weissmore, had lived for generations in a small village in the Carpathian Mountains, in a region that changed hands between various empires and kingdoms throughout history. Records from the area were sparse, but church documents from the 1700s mentioned the family frequently, usually in connection with accusations of heretical practices and unnatural occurrences. A parish registry from 1739 contained a particularly detailed account written by Father Miklos Horvath. The Weissmore women are known throughout the region for their exquisite dolls, crafted with such skill that they seem almost alive. It is said that no portrait painter can capture a likeness as perfectly as a Weissmore doll, but there are whispers that the price of such perfection is paid in blood and soul. 3 days ago, the youngest daughter of the blacksmith disappeared. Today, Magda Weissmore presented the child's parents with a doll in her exact image, claiming it was a gift of remembrance. The likeness was uncanny, down to the small scar on the child's chin from a fall last winter. The parents accepted the gift in their grief. That night, the father woke to find the doll seated at the foot of his bed, its head turned at an impossible angle. He swears that it spoke his daughter's name in her voice. By morning, the doll had returned to the shelf where it had been placed. When the father attempted to destroy it, he was seized by a paralysis that left him bedridden for 2 days. I have examined the doll myself. While I found no evidence of witchcraft, I cannot deny the disquiet it instills. The glass eyes seem to follow movement, and the weight of it in my hands was greater than it should have been. Most disturbing was the warmth it retained, as though recently held close to a living body, though none had touched it in my presence. The entry concluded with a statement that the Weissmore family left the village abruptly after a mob gathered at their home, intending to search for evidence of involvement in the child's disappearance. They reportedly fled in the night, taking little with them, except for a large trunk that required 4 men to carry. Dr. Reynolds discovered similar stories in other communities across Eastern Europe, where the family had settled temporarily before moving on. In each location, their arrival coincided with the establishment of a doll-making business, followed by a series of mysterious disappearances, and ultimately a hasty departure before suspicions could be confirmed. By the time Johann and Elise Weissmore, later anglicized to John and Elizabeth Whitmore, arrived in America in 1810, they had amassed considerable wealth through their doll-making enterprise. They settled initially in Boston, where they opened a small shop catering to wealthy families seeking personalized dolls for their children. An article in a Boston newspaper from 1812 praised the remarkable verisimilitude of the Whitmore dolls, noting that they seemed to capture not just the physical appearance of their subjects, but something of their spirit as well. The same newspaper, just 8 months later, reported on an unusual pox that had affected several children in the city's affluent neighborhoods, all of whom had been the subjects of Whitmore dolls in the previous year. The pattern repeated itself: sudden departures, new beginnings in different cities, a string of unexplained illnesses or disappearances, and eventually the establishment of the family in Blackwood, Arkansas, where they found a degree of isolation that had eluded them in more populous areas. Dr. Reynolds's most significant discovery came when she located a distant branch of the Whitmore family still living in Europe. These papers included the Journal of Greta Weissmore, dated 1712, which detailed the origin of what she called the family gift. According to Greta's account, the first Weissmore doll maker had learned the art not from human instruction, but from an entity she encountered in the forest outside their village, a being that appeared sometimes as an old woman and sometimes as a young child, but whose eyes remained the same, regardless of its form, black as a winter midnight and just as cold. This entity taught a process by which a doll could be made to capture not just the likeness of a person, but a portion of their very essence. After months of correspondence, she was granted access to family papers that had been preserved for generations, documents that the American branch of the family had either lost or deliberately destroyed. The ritual required a personal item from the subject, preferably something that had been in close contact with their body, and a complex series of preparations involving materials that Greta described only as the clay that lives and the water of souls. Most disturbing was Greta's matter-of-fact description of what happened to those whose essence was captured in the dolls. They do not die immediately. Indeed, they may live for many years afterward, though never as fully as before. Something essential has been removed from them, a spark, a vitality that cannot be replaced. They become hollow, going through the motions of life without truly experiencing it. Their emotions flatten, their creativity diminishes, their dreams cease. In time, many seek out the comfort of the doll that holds their missing piece, drawn to it by an invisible thread that can never be severed. This is the true value of our craft, not merely the creation of lifelike figures, but the harvesting of essence that sustains our family's longevity. Each doll in our collection contains a fragment of someone who once lived, a fragment that continues to generate the energy on which we feed. Without this sustenance, we would age and die as ordinary humans do. With it, our lives can extend for centuries. The journal went on to explain that the most powerful dolls were those created from willing subjects, individuals who knowingly surrendered a portion of their essence. These were rare, as few people would voluntarily accept such a bargain, but occasionally someone in desperate circumstances or with a morbid fascination for the process would consent. The willing vessel creates a doll of unprecedented power. The connection flows both ways, allowing us not merely to feed on their essence, but to potentially transfer our consciousness into their physical form when our current bodies fail. This is the ultimate goal of our craft, not merely extended life, but the ability to move from vessel to vessel indefinitely. According to Greta's journal, there was a hierarchy within the family, with only those who had mastered the most advanced techniques permitted to attempt a consciousness transfer. The process required a circle of 13 dolls, each containing the essence of a different individual, arranged around the failing family member. Through a ritual that Greta described only in the vaguest terms, the consciousness of the dying person could be transferred into a new, younger body, assuming that a suitable vessel had been prepared. Dr. Reynolds hypothesized that Elizabeth and Margaret Whitmore had attempted this ritual in 1908, but with a crucial difference. Rather than transferring their consciousness into new human vessels, they had apparently attempted to transfer themselves into the dolls, perhaps as a means of escaping detection until new human vessels could be secured. The arrangement of the dolls around the sisters' bodies, Reynolds wrote in her analysis, corresponds exactly to the pattern described in Greta Weissmore's journal for a consciousness transfer ritual. However, the direction of the transfer appears to have been reversed. Instead of moving from a doll to a human vessel, they were attempting to move from human to doll. This theory gained credibility when Reynolds discovered an invoice from a shipping company dated just 1 week before the sisters' estimated date of death. The invoice listed a delivery to the Whitmore house of a large crate from Vienna, with customs documentation describing the contents as art objects. The timing suggested that whatever was in that crate, possibly new dolls or materials needed for the ritual, may have played a role in the sisters' final act. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Reynolds received a letter from a private collector in Seattle who had read about her research in an academic journal. The collector, who asked to remain anonymous, claimed to possess one of the original Whitmore dolls, purchased at an estate sale in 1995. "I didn't know its history when I acquired it," the collector wrote. "I was simply struck by its craftsmanship and the lifelike quality of its features. Within days of bringing it into my home, I began experiencing vivid dreams in which the doll spoke to me. In these dreams, it identified itself as Margaret Whitmore and said that it had been waiting for someone who would understand. Over time, the dreams became more detailed. Margaret began to share memories, her childhood in the Whitmore house, the techniques her mother had taught her for capturing a person's essence, the ritual she and her sister had performed in that final week. She showed me how they had placed themselves within the circle of dolls, how they had consumed a tincture prepared with ingredients I dare not name, how they had recited the words passed down through generations of their family. The ritual had worked, she told me, but not as they intended. Instead of transferring their consciousness fully into the dolls they had selected as their new vessels, they had fragmented, pieces of their awareness scattered among all 13 dolls in the circle. For over a century, these fragments have been seeking reunion, drawn to one another across distance and time. Margaret believes that if all 13 dolls from that final circle could be gathered together again, she and her sister might be able to complete the transfer they began, either consolidating their consciousness within the dolls, or, if suitable human vessels were present, transferring into living bodies once more. The collector included photographs of the doll in their possession, a porcelain figure approximately 18 inches tall, dressed in a blue silk gown that had faded with age. The face was that of a woman in her early 30s, with delicate features and an expression that seemed to convey both sadness and anticipation. The eyes were glass, painted a deep green, but in certain angles of the photographs, they appeared to reflect light in a way that suggested inner luminescence. Dr. Reynolds arranged to examine the doll under controlled conditions at the University of Washington's Department of Anthropology. What she discovered defied conventional explanation. Under a microscope, the skin of the doll revealed a composite structure unlike any known porcelain or ceramic material. Layers of mineral content interspersed with what appeared to be organic compounds that had somehow been preserved from decomposition. Spectroscopic analysis identified proteins consistent with human tissue, though altered in ways that the laboratory could not fully characterize. Most disturbing were the results from an experimental scanning technique developed for archaeological artifacts. The interior of the doll contained a network of filaments that resembled a rudimentary nervous system, connecting the eyes and ears to a central structure within the torso that had the general shape and density of a human heart, though approximately 1/5 the size. What we're looking at, Dr. Reynolds noted in her research diary, is not a doll designed to resemble a human, but something that exists in the uncanny valley between object and organism, neither fully alive nor completely inanimate. The level of technological sophistication required to create such a hybrid would be beyond the capabilities of 19th century craftspeople, raising profound questions about the actual methods and materials used by the Whitmore family. During the third day of examination, an incident occurred that prompted the immediate termination of the research project. According to witnesses, the laboratory experienced a sudden power outage that lasted approximately 30 seconds. When emergency lighting activated, the doll, which had been secured on an examination table, was found in an upright seated position, though no one had touched it. Most disturbing, 3 witnesses independently reported that in the moment before the lights returned to full strength, they observed the doll's eyes tracking movement across the room. The doll was returned to its owner with the university's recommendation that it be secured in a climate-controlled vault. 2 weeks later, the collector contacted Dr. Reynolds to report that the doll had disappeared from their home. No signs of forced entry were found, and no other items were missing, including several valuable antiques that had been in the same display case. In the months following this incident, reports began to surface of similar disappearances among collections known to include dolls of possible Whitmore origin. A museum in Chicago found an empty display case where a 19th century porcelain figure of unknown provenance had been exhibited. A private collection in Atlanta reported the theft of a doll that matched descriptions of Elizabeth Whitmore in her 20s, though security footage showed no one entering the room where it was kept. By 2024, Dr. Reynolds had documented the disappearance of 8 dolls that fit the profile of potential Whitmore creations. If the collector's account was accurate, this meant that at least 8 of the 13 dolls from the sisters' final ritual had gone missing, possibly drawn together by the fragments of consciousness they contained. The implications were unsettling enough that Dr. Reynolds contacted the FBI's art crime team, presenting her findings as evidence of a coordinated theft ring targeting valuable antique dolls. While this explanation accounted for the physical disappearance of the items, it did not address the more disturbing possibility suggested by the Seattle collector's experiences, that the dolls themselves were somehow orchestrating their reunion. In April of 2024, Dr. Reynolds received an anonymous package containing a flash drive and a brief handwritten note. "They're gathering in Blackwood. The circle is nearly complete. The drive contains surveillance footage from various locations in and around Blackwood, Arkansas, all filmed within the previous month. Each clip showed the same 2 women, appearing to be in their early 30s, with pale complexions and movements that seemed oddly deliberate, almost mechanical at times. In several instances, they were seen carrying what appeared to be antique dolls, cradled in their arms like infants. Most significantly, the footage showed the women entering an abandoned church on the outskirts of Blackwood, a structure that, according to local records, had been built on land that once formed part of the original Whitmore estate, though it stood just beyond the boundaries of what later became Riverside Park. Dr. Reynolds immediately contacted local authorities in Blackwood, but her concerns were dismissed as academic overreach. The sheriff's office reported that they had no records of any disturbances at the abandoned church, and suggested that the women might simply be local history enthusiasts or paranormal investigators drawn by the town's macabre legacy. Unwilling to let the matter rest, Reynolds traveled to Blackwood herself, arriving on May 15, 2024. She checked into a local motel under an assumed name and began her own surveillance of the abandoned church. For 3 days, she observed no activity at the site. On the evening of the 4th day, which she later realized corresponded to the new moon, she witnessed several figures approaching the church from different directions. Each carried what appeared to be a doll, though in the fading light she couldn't make out details. Reynolds documented the gathering with a night vision camera from a concealed position approximately 100 yards from the church. Her footage, later recovered by local authorities, provides the only record of what transpired that night. The video shows 7 individuals, 5 women and 2 men, ranging in age from approximately 20 to 70, entering the church between 9 and 10 p.m. None appeared to acknowledge the others, moving with the same deliberate gait noted in the earlier surveillance footage. At 10:23 p.m., lights became visible through the church's broken stained glass windows. Not electric lights, but the flickering illumination of what appeared to be dozens of candles. Reynolds narrates in a whisper that she can hear chanting from within the structure, though the words are indistinct in the recording. At 11:47 p.m., Reynolds reports a sudden drop in temperature, her breath becoming visible in the night air despite the mild spring weather. The camera shows condensation forming rapidly on its lens, which she wipes away while continuing to narrate. Something's happening. The light through the windows has changed color. It's shifting from yellow to a pale blue-white. The chanting has stopped, but there's another sound now, like glass being scraped against stone, amplified 100-fold. It's, oh my God. The footage briefly shows a column of blue-white light erupting from the church's roof before the camera malfunctions. When the image returns approximately 20 seconds later, the church is dark once more. Reynolds' narration is now rapid and frightened. They're coming out, all of them at once. But there's something wrong with how they're moving. It's like they're being worn rather than walking on their own, and their eyes are glowing in the dark. The camera shows the figures emerging from the church, the same 7 individuals who entered earlier, but now moving in perfect unison, their gait smooth and graceful rather than mechanical. As they pass under the moonlight, their skin shows the same porcelain-like sheen described in Harding's account of the Whitmore sisters. Most disturbing are their eyes, which appear to reflect light much more intensely than would be natural. Reynolds continues filming as the figures form a line and begin walking toward the tree line and, unknowingly, toward her hiding place. Her narration becomes increasingly panicked. "They've seen me! How could they see me? I'm completely hidden and it's pitch black out here. But they're looking right at me, all 14 eyes fixed in my direction. They're coming this way. I need to..." The footage ends abruptly. According to police reports, Dr. Eleanor Reynolds' rental car was found abandoned near the church the following morning. Her motel room showed signs that she had intended to return. Her luggage remained unpacked, and her laptop was still charging on the desk. A search of the church revealed an elaborate ritual space in the former sanctuary. 13 wooden chairs had been arranged in a circle, with evidence of candles having been placed at specific intervals between them. In the center of the circle was a larger chair, its wooden surface worn smooth with age and carved with symbols that matched those described in Deputy Harding's journal as being associated with the Whitmore dolls. Most disturbing was the collection of 13 antique dolls arranged on a table against the far wall, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship with lifelike features and clothing from various historical periods. Experts who examined them confirmed that they matched the description of Whitmore dolls, but could not determine their exact age or composition without invasive testing, which was not authorized. By the time officials connected the disappearance to Dr. Reynolds' research and understood the potential significance of the dolls, the table was empty. A deputy who'd been posted at the scene reported that he had just looked away for a second, and when he turned back, the dolls were gone. No one had entered or exited the church during his watch. The search for Dr. Reynolds continued for weeks, involving local law enforcement, the FBI, and eventually volunteers from throughout the region. No trace of her was found, though several search party members reported unsettling experiences in the woods surrounding the church. The sensation of being watched, whispered conversations just beyond the range of hearing, and in one case, the discovery of small footprints that began and ended inexplicably in the middle of a clearing. 2 months after Reynolds' disappearance, a package arrived at the office of Dr. James Martinez, her colleague at the university. It contained a porcelain doll, approximately 18 inches tall, dressed in clothing that matched what Reynolds had been wearing the night she vanished. The face was a perfect likeness of Eleanor Reynolds, down to the small mole beside her left eyebrow. Accompanying the doll was a handwritten note in what experts later confirmed was Reynolds' handwriting, though with subtle differences in pressure and stroke formation. Dear James, I've made a remarkable discovery about the Whitmore sisters and their work, one that I can only fully appreciate now that I've experienced it from the inside, so to speak. The process they developed wasn't about stealing life or preserving death, but about transcending the limitations of a single consciousness and a single form. What you see before you is both me and not me. I exist now in multiple states simultaneously, within this vessel, within others, and within the network that connects all of our kind. It's not immortality as humans understand it, but something far more intricate and beautiful. The circle has been completed. All 13 fragments have been reunited, and new vessels have been prepared for those who wish to join us. The sisters' work continues, as it has for centuries, adapting to each new era while preserving the ancient knowledge that makes our existence possible. Don't try to find us. We move between worlds now, visible only when we wish to be seen. But know that we are watching, always watching, seeking those whose essence would complement our collection. Perhaps someday, if you find yourself drawn to a particularly beautiful doll with eyes that seem to recognize you, we may meet again. Until then, remember that every reflection holds multiple realities, and what you think you know about life, death, and consciousness is merely the smallest fragment of a much larger truth. Forever yours, in every sense of the word, Eleanor. The doll was secured in a special containment unit at the university's anthropology department for further study. 3 days later, the unit was found empty, the security systems disabled by what technical experts could only describe as an impossible power surge. In the years since, there have been scattered reports of sightings matching the description of Dr. Reynolds and the other individuals who entered the church that night. They are invariably described as unnaturally graceful in their movements, with skin that has a subtle luminescence in certain light and eyes that never seem to blink. In each case, the sightings coincide with the disappearance of antique dolls from local collections, or more disturbingly, with individuals reporting strange dreams in which they are offered perfection and preservation in exchange for just a small piece of themselves. Child psychologists have noted an unusual trend in the drawings of children from these same communities, depictions of people with doll skin, or the pretty ladies with the shiny eyes who visit them in dreams, showing them beautiful dolls that look exactly like themselves. Most reports come from locations with historical connections to the Whitmore family. Blackwood, Arkansas, of course, but also Boston, Charleston, St. Louis, and other cities where they lived temporarily during their migration across America. Most concerning are the cases of missing persons in these areas, not frequent enough to suggest a pattern to those unfamiliar with the Whitmore history, but showing distinct similarities when examined collectively. The disappearances typically involve individuals who had recently acquired antique dolls, visited exhibitions featuring historical toys, or reported dreams about being selected or chosen for something important. In 2025, an anonymous donor established the Whitmore Awareness Foundation, dedicated to tracking and documenting cases potentially connected to the dolls. They also provide resources for individuals who believe they may have encountered one of the dolls or their current vessels. The Foundation's website includes a list of warning signs. If you experience any of the following after acquiring an antique doll or meeting someone with the characteristics described in this document, please contact our emergency hotline immediately. Dreams in which the doll or individual offers to preserve you or keep part of you young forever. The sensation of being watched when alone in a room with the doll, unexplained movements of the doll when not in your direct line of sight, finding the doll in a different position or location than where you left it, feeling unusually tired or drained after spending time near the doll, a compulsion to make or acquire more dolls that resemble people you know, discovering small objects belonging to you, hair clips, jewelry, etc., in the doll's possession, hearing whispered conversations that stop when you enter a room where the doll is kept, finding small footprints in dust or dirt that start and stop inexplicably, noticing that the doll's expression seems to change in different lighting or when viewed from the corner of your eye. The site also includes protocols for the safe handling and containment of suspected Whitmore dolls, though they acknowledge that these measures may only be temporarily effective. Based on documented cases, we believe the consciousness within these dolls can remain dormant for decades before becoming active. The Foundation maintains a secure database of known and suspected Whitmore dolls, their last known locations, and any unusual incidents associated with them. Triggers for activation may include physical handling, proximity to other Whitmore dolls, or contact with individuals who possess a particularly compatible essence. Once active, the dolls demonstrate a remarkable ability to influence their surroundings, affecting electronic systems, manipulating the perceptions of those nearby, and eventually compelling actions that further their goals. The ultimate objective appears to be the acquisition of new vessels, both doll and human, to expand what they refer to as their collection. Despite these warnings, the market for antique dolls continues to thrive, with collectors willing to pay premium prices for items matching the description of Whitmore creations, either unaware of or undeterred by their sinister history. Online auction sites regularly feature listings for lifelike Victorian dolls with glass eyes, or porcelain figures with unusual craftsmanship, often accompanied by descriptions that hint at their special nature without explicitly connecting them to the Whitmore legacy. One such listing from June 2025 read simply, "Antique doll, American, circa 1900, exceptional condition. Original owner reported that it captured her daughter's spirit perfectly. Glass eyes appear to change color in different light. Previous owners have noted its comforting presence during times of loneliness." The doll sold for $27,000 to an anonymous buyer. 3 weeks later, local news in the buyer's hometown reported the disappearance of a woman in her 30s. described by friends as having recently become obsessed with an antique doll that looked eerily like her as a child. The investigation remains open. The doll was never found. In October 2025, maintenance workers renovating the basement of the Arkansas State Historical Society building reported an unusual discovery. The lead box from Deputy Harding's collection, which had been secured in a climate-controlled vault since 2023, was found empty, its heavy lid open despite the multiple locks that had secured it. Security footage showed no unauthorized entry to the vault. The last documented access had been 3 months earlier, during Dr. Reynolds' examination before her disappearance. The director of the Historical Society issued a brief statement. "We are investigating the circumstances surrounding this incident. At this time, we have no explanation for how the artifacts were removed from a secured facility." Unofficially, staff members reported hearing children's laughter in the empty corridors of the building after hours and finding small, perfectly formed footprints in dust that had settled in unused rooms, footprints that began and ended in the middle of the floor, as if whoever made them had appeared and disappeared without crossing the threshold. The Whitmore case remains one of the most disturbing and least understood chapters in American folklore. Are the dolls merely the focus of superstition and paranoia, or do they represent something far more sinister, a technology or ritual that challenges our understanding of consciousness and mortality? For those who have encountered them, the question is not whether the Whitmore dolls possess some form of awareness, but what that awareness desires and what it is willing to do to achieve its goals. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the story is the possibility that it continues to unfold even now, with new chapters being written in the experiences of those who unwittingly bring these objects into their homes, drawn by their beauty, their craftsmanship, and the inexplicable sense of connection they inspire. If you find yourself browsing an antique shop or online auction and come across a particularly lifelike doll, with glass eyes that seem to hold your gaze a moment too long, remember the fate of the Whitmore sisters and all those who have been drawn into their circle over the centuries. Remember Dr. Reynolds' final warning, written after she had already begun her transformation. What you think you know about life, death, and consciousness is merely the smallest fragment of a much larger truth. And most importantly, remember that some vessels are meant to remain empty, that the promise of preservation may ultimately be an invitation to become a prisoner in a porcelain prison, watching through glass eyes as your essence feeds something that has existed in the shadows of human society for untold generations. If you feel drawn to such a doll, if you sense it calling to you in dreams or feel an inexplicable connection to its lifeless form, turn instead to the true source of eternal life. Turn to God and Jesus Christ, who offer not the hollow preservation of appearance, but the fulfilling preservation of the soul. Because somewhere in America, 2 women with porcelain skin and unblinking eyes are still collecting, still creating, still seeking new vessels to add to their circle. And they're always watching for those who might be willing or vulnerable enough to surrender just a small piece of themselves in exchange for a promise that's as beautiful and empty as the dolls themselves. The next time you catch a glimpse of movement from the corner of your eye and turn to find only a doll sitting innocently on a shelf, ask yourself, was it truly motionless all along, or did it simply freeze before you could catch it in motion? And if you ever wake in the night to find a child-sized silhouette beside your bed, don't look directly into its glass eyes. Because what the Whitmore sisters discovered all those years ago wasn't a way to preserve life, but a way to transform it into something else entirely, something that wears the shape of humanity like a costume, while harboring appetites and ambitions that are anything but human.